Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Dryden Theater. I'm Jared Case, curator of film exhibitions here at the Dryden Theater and the George Eastman Museum, and this is our monthly Dryden Roundtable discussion. We're breaking format a little bit this month. We've got a presentation for you at the beginning, and then myself and the gents over at Film Preservation Services will hop on stage to continue the conversation. If you have any questions at that point, we would love to take them. The next Dryden Roundtable will be not quite a kickoff. The film series is starting a week before, but it's tying into our big summer series, Beyond the Universe, Comic Books and Film. And we're going to be very fortunate to have author Matt Singer here for that weekend. He'll be here the previous night for his book, Siskel and Ebert, about Siskel and Ebert, called Opposable Thumbs. And we'll be screening Gates of Heaven that night on June 28th. And then June 29th, he'll join us for the roundtable, as well as a screening of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, along with a discussion after that. And he'll have, we'll hope to have copies of both of his books to sign and buy if you want them here. And we'll also have in that conversation Professor James Rosenow from University of Rochester, who teaches comic books and film, as well as someone who I was introduced to and then turned out to be James's TA, Jamie Keaton, who is seeking his PhD right now under that same discipline. So please join us for that. And of course, you can keep up to date on all of our programming with our e-newsletters if you want to sign up on our website or on the sign-up sheet out in the lobby. So, at this point in time, I'm going to hand it over to our Film Preservation Services team. Please welcome to the podium in rotation, Graham Brown, Chris Kraus, and Josh Yoakum.
Thank you very much, Jared. And thank you all for coming out today. I know it's a really nice Saturday, and the sun is shining unexpectedly, so we appreciate you taking an hour of that day to spend it inside with us as we talk in a little more detail about what exactly happens behind the scenes here at the George Eastman Museum. So myself and my colleagues Chris Kraus and Josh Yoakum are what are called preservation officers, which means that we work on the preservation sector of the moving image department here at the George Eastman Museum. And Film Preservation Services is a fully equipped digital preservation lab that's part of the museum, where we work on films from our own collection, from international collections, and we do a lot of very interesting work, and we're here to tell you a little bit about all of the steps that happen in film preservation. So the way this presentation is going to work is that we are going to follow the journey that one reel of film would take when it arrives at Film Preservation Services for a full treatment. So first, just a little bit more about the George Eastman Museum and its collections. I'm sure some of you probably already know a lot about the museum, but just to go over some basics, the Moving Image Collection holds over 28,000 unique titles in our vaults here. The elements range from early Lumiere experiments from the late 19th century to modern Hollywood and Bollywood releases as recent as the 2000s. So that's quite a long history that our collections span here. And what that means is that we have a lot of different types of film here that all need preservation. Negatives, interpositives, reversals, projection prints, color negatives, Technicolor, hand stenciled color. The stock can be nitrate. We have the Nitrate Picture Show coming up where you can see a lot of that type of film projected. Actually, we're one of only several theaters in the country that is legally permitted to project nitrate film. Diacetate, polyester, and any sort of film gauge, including 9.5 millimeter. So if you name it, we got it. And our collections have a special focus on silent era and early Hollywood films. The first curator of the Moving Image Department, James Card, who founded the Moving Image Department here at the Eastman Museum, was a private collector, and he had a special fondness and love for these types of film, for silent cinema and early Hollywood, and his collection was the first donation to the collection, and during his tenure, a lot of the acquisitions focused on that era of cinema. So, as a result, we have one of the world's leading collections of silent films. And our perpetual goal on the preservation team is to, in addition to conserving the original film objects and making sure that they have a long and fruitful life. We would preserve all of the unpreserved films in the collection, and we call that a perpetual goal because it takes years and years of work, and it's a lot easier said than done. You can imagine 28,000 unique titles. So, with that, what exactly is preservation? I'm sure some of you are eager to hear the answer to that, considering you're in the seats today. But for motion pictures, preservation is essentially duplication. And there are two methods of duplication, photochemical and digital. So all physical film stock degrades over time. If it's kept in improper conditions, meaning very warm or humid conditions, it will decompose faster. The image that you see on the bottom left is a tinted nitrate film from 1916 that's suffering from extreme decomposition. So any film printed before 1950 eventually is going to look like that. And this process, because it's a chemical process, is irreversible. Once it happens, there's nothing you can do about it. So we have to duplicate it as quickly as we can to preserve what image is left on that film. And we consider a film preserved when we obtain a new duplicate negative, and we consider that our benchmark for preservation because once we have a duplicate negative, the original object can remain in the vaults, and that duplicate negative can be made to make any subsequent copies for exhibition or distribution. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. So these new negatives can be made either photochemically through contact or optical printing, or film recording from a digital master. So the machine on the right here is an example of an optical printer, which is the class 1 method of typical photochemical duplication. Contact printing is the standard emulsion to emulsion, negative to positive, positive to negative. If your film is in really great condition, it doesn't have a lot of shrinkage. We use the term shrinkage to refer to when the film dehydrates and actually physically shrinks. And once it shrinks past a certain threshold, we can't put it on the contact printer anymore because it won't line up with that new negative that we're creating. And optical printing is a method of duplication wherein your start film, or the film that you're duplicating, is projected onto your duplicate negative, uses lenses that can compensate for any sort of shrinkage, warpage, or damage that would prevent it from running on a typical contact printer. And that's why we're film preservation, and we are film preservation services because we work on the digital side of things. So this machine in the middle is the ARRI laser made by the ARRI Film Corporation. This machine takes digital files and uses red, green, and blue lasers to print them back out onto a photochemical negative reel. And our goal is to use our digital equipment and our digital tools to create an authentic representation of the objects in our collection for preservation and for further exhibition. Our goal is not to sort of upscale the image or make it look better than it had originally looked. We want to stay true to the authenticity of the objects, and any sort of restoration work that we do on these films are meant to reverse the normal wear and tear that accumulates during projection and handling and the passage of time. We want to, so for example, if a film premiered in 1935, we want to create a digital representation that mirrors how it would have looked in 1935. We don't want to leave any traces of our work or sort of leave any indication that the film is a product of 2024, if that makes sense. So this is the general workflow that happens at Film Preservation Services, starting with the inspection of the film reels as they come into the office, through scanning, restoration, grading, delivery, and finally long-term digital archiving at the end. And the text is a little bit small, but you can see we have a lot of quality control in between each steps. In any sort of workflow like this where you're working with lots of digital files, it's very important to track your work and catch any mistakes as they're happening so that if we're at stage 5 of our workflow, we don't have to go all the way back to stage 2. So Inspection and repair is the first thing that happens when a film arrives at our offices, and it can be the quickest or the longest part of this entire workflow. Our focus in repair is to make the transport of the object through the scanner as simple and painless as possible. Any sort of image-based damage, say, for example, the decomposition that we saw earlier, or a scratch through the emulsion, is not the type of damage that we focus on during this part of the process. We focus on what's called mechanical damage, meaning damage that is threatening the physical integrity of the film. So here we have an example of a film that's missing a lot of perforations along one edge, and we've got tears in the image along the other edge. And so when that's moving through the scanner, all those pieces of the film that are hanging off the edge and have those jagged, sharp contours can catch on the edges or the corners of the machinery of our scanner and can make the damage worse. And that's something that we try to avoid at all costs, is to introduce more damage onto these film objects. We're film preservation services. We don't want to be damaging our collections anymore. So for these types of repairs, we use specialized perforated tape to sort of reconstruct physically the edges of the film and to tape over any tears that are going into the image. And so this serves two purposes. It reinforces the film where it's structurally weaker, so it has a smaller chance of breaking or suffering further damage through just regular handling. And it also makes it easier to stabilize the image when we're scanning it, because the perforations on either side, our scanning software analyzes the image and uses those perforation positions to stabilize the final output. So by giving ourselves these tape-shaped perforations on the edge, we are saving ourselves digital work further down the line. And again, only physical mechanical repair, no intervention on the image. Any image-based damage is addressed digitally later in the workflow. All right, and I'm going to pass it off to Chris, who's going to talk a little bit about our scanning procedures.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris Kraus. I'd like to talk a little bit about our capture settings and our scanning workflows. I should mention as well, any of the physical repairs that we make, we endeavor that they are reversible so that they can be removed immediately and returned to the collection, or future archivists can, basically take a second chance at the repair. We don't want to make anything that's irreversible, any irreversible changes to the object. So at Film Preservation Services, we capture every single frame of a film reel gets an individual file. So for reference, a foot of 16mm film is 40 frames. A foot of 35mm is 16 frames. And typically we're dealing with film rolls or reels that are 1,000 to 2,000 feet long. So it adds up quick. So for an individual reel of 1,000 feet, we might be talking about 16,000 frames and 32,000 individual files for a 2,000-foot reel. And we'll get into a bit of the sizes of those things later, but just to sort of map out what it's going to look like as we go. So the two main ways that we capture our preservation level scanner is the AreaScan XT. It can handle 35mm and 16mm. Its output they're uncompressed DPX files, or an image raster format that saves an individual record for red, green, and blue light. It illuminates those channels via narrow band LEDs, so a very particular wavelength of each of those colors. And it can scan in up to 6K resolution. Typically, we're scanning in what's called an overscan 4K. So I think we have an image of it later where you can sort of see into the edges, into the perforations, but it's not entirely edge to edge. And usually the image itself, that aperture, has at minimum a full aperture 4K resolution. Anything extra, there are extra pixels for the perforation area. For negatives, we scan in a 10-bit logarithmic format, which is an encoding of density that's a digital version of a negative. For positives, we're capturing in a much more linear format, also a higher bit depth in 16 bits. We can talk about this later, but these are both advantageous settings for the formats. We also have our Blackmagic Cintel scanner, which we use as a reference level scanner. If anyone just needs to see what's on it, it can travel in real time and is a quick way to get a reference level of what we're dealing with. That can work in 4K or 2K, can handle 35 or 16 as well. And the advantage of that machine is that it can capture audio. The ARRI scan can only do image. And the specs there are 48,000 kilohertz sample rate and in a 24-bit depth. And for the transport mechanism, it uses a sprocketed drive, and the imaging sensor uses what's called a Bayer filter that takes a sort of an interpolated sample of the image. That's its disadvantage. As I mentioned, the ARRI scan takes an individual sample for each color, so that we prefer that sort of capture setting. I should point out as well that the ARRI scan, its sprocketed drives, or the sprocketed transports, can handle between 2 and 3% shrinkage. We also have a transport system that is sprocketless, basically rubber capstan rollers, and that can handle, we haven't, I guess, seen the ultimate end of that, but we've scanned things that are 3.9% shrunken, which is extremely shrunken material. The Cintel wouldn't be able to handle material like that. So this is going to illustrate just how bad some of the decomposition of the film image can be. Luckily, this film structurally was still in good shape. It had some shrinkage. The film base or the film support had some shrinkage, but primarily it suffered from hydrolysis, and the emulsion basically is starting to dissolve from off of the film base. This is a nitrate positive that was found in a New York City basement, stored in hot and humid conditions, as Graham mentioned. So I'll just run the clip. You'll see, so this, as I mentioned, this film is decomposed. See if you can spot the decomposition. Raise your hand when you find it. No. But this is the only copy that's known to exist of this film.
What year is that?
1919, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
You'll also notice, Graham mentioned stabilization. The black bars at the bottom that are sort of jumping up and down are aligning the image to a reference frame that we've selected, and the scanner is doing its best job to sort of position all of them in the same place. That's a very advantageous feature. And amazing how much you can actually, well, maybe not this sequence, but in other sequences you can tell what's happening. So this is a film we are about to start working on. We're going to try and digitally restore it. This is the most extreme, maybe not the most extreme example of decomposition. There are films where the image is completely gone, but this is pretty far along. So I'll jump into a little bit of our digital restoration practices. Once we have losslessly acquired our each individual frame of the film reel, we then start to process it in a number of pieces of software that we're trying to reduce the appearance of dirt and scratches. Maybe a lot of you are familiar with these techniques at this point in time. Digital restoration has been around for a number of years, but the sort of the initial steps are to stabilize and deflicker the image, that where the scanner could not, or perhaps there's printed in instability in a unique element that we're dealing with. We're also trying to reduce the flicker that over time some individual frames may have they might have faded in particular ways or discolored in particular ways. We're going to try and reduce the appearance of that. And then we'll start to try to minimize the dirt and dust through filters. So as we've mentioned, we're not trying to make this look better than it did initially. So grain management is a thing. We're trying to represent it as it was. We don't want to over restore. We don't want it to look too clean or too polished, too stable. These things are unnatural to how film actually is, when we view it. So the way that this does this is by interpolating information from adjacent frames. You can see, so it can use basically instances of a part of the image to borrow from and interpolate the two together, or we can clone from adjacent frames to mask some damage or discoloration. And our two main programs that we're using at this point are cutting-edge programs, Diamant and Phoenix, and we're very happy with them. And let's see a couple more examples. This is a film from
25 or 26?
A Soviet film from 25 or 26 that had, again, this is the only known copy to exist, 16 millimeter preservation of it. And you saw the before is quite unstable in the printing. The copy was not well made. And so through this, we're doing the best we can to stabilize what we can see of the image. And you'll see a black bar that jumps in partway through, but we've prioritized sort of watchability, the least distracting thing that we can. But it's much easier to see, to view. This is another extreme example of sort of errors that can result in printing. And one more for you. Just an overall, the left side of the image, I believe, is unrestored. The lower right of the image is restored.
I think it's the other way around.
Reverse that.
Yeah, so the bottom right is the unrestored.
So you'll notice that the upper left is pleasantly stable, less flickery, and instances of dirt and dust are less apparent. And that's basically our goal. But to do this, we're processing every single frame individually. We have tools and filters that can sort of handle it en masse. Like it's basically akin to Photoshop, but for thousands of frames. But when it comes down to it, our manual interventions are frame by frame, one at a time. I'll talk about another endeavor we've sort of recently embarked on, which is Reconstruction. We call it Reconstruction. And that would be the goal of reconstructing the original runtime of a film. So the copies that these projects are useful when a film has been very popular, for instance, and there are a number of copies around the world, but all of them through projection might have lost individual frames over the years. So there are many incomplete copies that exist. For instance, if we have one here, there might be one in Italy, and they lack a certain number of frames in each of them, so they're not complete. Maybe whole scenes have been edited out. So our goal of these types of projects are to recombine through scanning many multiple elements to reference and pull frames from individual copies, basically. So the way that this works is the museum will put out a call to the archival community to see what elements exist in other archives, and we'll request those. And through sharing of inspection reports, we can determine which is the longest copy, and hopefully that is the most is the highest quality. If we're lucky, those two things. That's what we could describe. That the longest copy would also be the highest quality, but it's not usually that way. And then from that, we'll digitize all of the elements that we collect through that process, and then digitally synchronize them on a frame-by-frame level. And this is a view of a timeline where you can see we have 4 elements, each color-coded, and you can see that there are gaps in each of them, and that's where individual frames are missing. And so if we can, we'll organize it in such a way that the element that we use most often in this reconstruction will be the one that is the highest quality or closest to the original element. And if a frame is missing from that, we will defer to the one below, which would hopefully be of the next highest quality, and so on and so forth. You can see that sort of near here on the right-hand side of the screen, the sort of grayed out section there. Those clips have been what's called disabled because the first three elements that we're referencing are from foreign archives and they have foreign intertitles. So we have one copy of a 16 millimeter print in this case that has English intertitles. And through these efforts, we're trying to recreate the full original runtime. And in often paper documentation is still available for some films that we work on. So we can reference the original copyright, for instance, or the original scripts that dictate exactly the original footage of the release. And of course, we must document everything, every single frame that we use, and share this with our archival partners around the world. So I'll pass it back to Graham, I think, for this section.
All right, thank you, Chris. Once all of our images, our frames have been cleaned up and put in the proper order, the next step is to perform grading and color correction on our files. So we are lucky enough to have a digital screening room in Film Preservation Services with a 2K barcode digital cinema projector, and we use DaVinci Resolve as our grading software, version 18. And when we have one available, we use an original projection print as the grading reference, meaning the target that we're trying to match our digital files to. Because if we scan a negative, for example, the way that a negative looks to our naked eye is vastly different, even if you invert it, is vastly different to how that final projection print is going to look. So we need that available, or some, any sort of print or visual reference so that we know what we're aiming for. And we prefer to do this style of grading in a theater because that mimics the intended viewing environment for our exhibition space. So in a theater, the behavior of the light and our perception of what we see on the screen is going to approximately match what we experience when we watch it, say, in the Dryden. So that's why that sort of environment is preferable for this sort of work. And when we have multiple elements for a film, as Chris was describing for these reconstructions, often the most challenging part of color correction is matching those different film scans to each other so that when we cut in between the different copies of the film, it's not noticeable to us, or it's as seamless as possible. And so if we have a 16 millimeter print, or say, for example, if our film originally premiered in 1925, and we have a nitrate print from 1927 and a 16 millimeter re-release from 1935, that re-release, if it's a few more generations removed from that original negative, is going to visually look a lot worse than that nitrate print. Perhaps there won't be as much detail visible, or there'll be a steeper contrast. The blacks will be very dark and inky, and the nitrate print, by comparison, will be super sharp, crystal clear, with a very nice, visually pleasing contrast profile. And so grading those two scans to match each other is very difficult, and oftentimes to get them to match perfectly one-to-one is nearly impossible. And so we have to figure out, how do we get the closest to matching these two elements without intervening too greatly on our original scans. And additionally, the scanner uses what's called diffuse light to capture our elements. And diffuse light means that the light that's illuminating the film doesn't come at it just from one direction. The light enters a light box, gets jumbled around, and then it is emitted through the aperture, and that bouncing around that diffuse light source, what it does a few things that are good for scanning. It provides an even scanning light so that the middle of the image isn't more intense or brighter than the edges of the image. And it also helps reduce the visibility of some scratches just initially in the capture. The reason why scratches are so prominent in a projector is because that directional projector light goes through the scratch and essentially casts a shadow on the screen. When you have diffuse light, because the light is illuminating that scratch from multiple angles, it decreases the profile of that shadow, and if the scratch is small enough, sometimes it's completely eliminated in capture from your diffuse lighting system. But then again, that style of illumination has a different, we perceive it differently from projected film, because as I had mentioned earlier, projector light is what's called collimated light or directional light, where the lamp hits a reflector in the back of the lamp house and then is focused straight on at the film, and that gives it, that's why it's so bright and it pops off the screen. And the experience of perceiving that style of illumination is different from diffuse illumination. So if you run the same film through those two different lighting scenarios, they're going to look visually different. So that's one of the challenges that's facing the archival community right now, is how can we figure out a way to mimic that different lighting profile from exhibition so that our digital representations go even further in sort of authentically replicating the experience of watching the film projected. So right now we're working on something called a style transfer, which is where we can take an image of part of the film or frame of the film under very carefully calibrated conditions, and essentially using our image off the scanner and this calibrated digital capture, create our own custom lookup table for each film. If anyone is unfamiliar with the concept of a lookup table, it is essentially an algorithm that transforms the profile of one image to match another profile. So in post-production, a lookup table, LUT, LUT, a LUT will be used to give a certain look to the film to make it seem a bit more like dark or noirish if you're making a thriller, or more bright and cheery. And if you're scanning a negative, you can use a LUT to transpose that image into a profile that more closely mimics what a print from that film would have looked like, because negative film and print film have very different, how they interact with light and how they record light is fundamentally different. So these are some of the challenges of grading. And when we are grading, even though Resolve is a very powerful program, a lot of big Hollywood movies use it to grade their films, because we want to stay authentic to the traditional analog methods of duplicating film, we a lot of times try to mimic what a printer would have done to grade the film. So we use lift gamma gain to adjust the darks, midtones, and highlights of our image in a manner that approximates how a film printer would grade the image, would grade a print that's coming off of a negative. And so here's an example of before and after a film for grading. So this is The Unknown. Was anybody present for the premiere of The Unknown here at the Dryden last month? All right, well, you'll get to see part of it now. So you're going to see actually two before and afters. The first playback you'll see is the raw, unedited image off the scanner. So it's going to appear like this, very gray, very flat. You'll see some dust, some scratches. Then you'll see the restored version, but before grading. So there'll be less scratches, less dust. It'll be a bit less shaky, a bit steadier image. And then you'll see what it looks like after grading. And for this film, we used a French nitrate print as our grading reference. Again, you can see some of that dark dust. Image is a bit steadier, a bit cleaner now. Malabar to the rescue. And then this is what the final version looked like. Oh, no, not again. All right, and next I'll bring up Josh Yoakum to talk about what happens after this, our long-term digital archiving and storage.
Hello, everyone. I'm Josh Yoakum. I'm going to talk about the final part of this process, which is the archiving of all of the outputs of this process. So we get a few things at the end of anything that goes through FPS. We'll get some, ideally, we'll get some physical elements out of the process, which will include a film out that is going to be, as we talked about in an earlier slide, a laser recorded film out negative. So we're going to take those digital images that we've produced and using a laser recorder write those back to film as an actual negative print. And then we will also get exhibition prints, which are going to be what would be played in theatrical distribution or played right here in the Dryden Theater. And those are just film elements, so they're able to be stored in our temperature and humidity controlled vaults with all the other film materials. They have the exact same requirements as kind of the source materials for any film that we started with. But in addition to getting those physical elements from a project, we also get a number of digital elements. So our kind of digital equivalent of a projection print's going to be a DCP or a digital cinema package. We'll also maybe, depending on the particular film, we might have streaming elements or different reference files for putting the film online in some capacity. We also get a lot of different versions of our files throughout a project. So we'll have those initial raw scans. We may have multiple intermediate versions of those scans. So if there's a project that had restoration work done on it, we're going to have to store an entirely separate version of those raw scans that now also has restoration work done on it. We'll then also, after grading a project, create what we call a DSM, or digital source master, which is going to be kind of the, again, another full, uncompressed, complete version of the film that represents kind of the final restored and graded version. And then we'll also keep all of the project files, so any projects from our restoration software, our DaVinci Resolve projects, all of those will be backed up. Derivatives or reference files, so those might be ProRes or MP4 files, any QC or reference files that were produced along the way. And those will all be written to duplicate LTO9 tapes. And we can see an image of our duplicate LTO9 tapes and our LTO9 deck over there. So LTO9 tapes, or LTO stands for linear tape open. It's a magnetic tape format. They look a little similar to like an 8-track tape, and I guess conceptually are similar. It's still just a magnetic tape, but the difference is that it is a digital tape format. So in this case, we're using a format called LTFS, or linear tape file system. And when you format one of these tapes with LTFS, you can actually, when this is hooked up to a computer, you can navigate the tape almost like it's a USB drive or a hard drive. And you can write files to it as though it were some kind of removable storage or a standard removable storage format. But it is still a linear format, so there's a a delay in like navigating that file system on the tape. And then, so as I mentioned, we were generating multiple copies of this very large image sequence multiple times throughout the process. And so one thing that we've started doing is using a command line tool called raw cooked, which takes those image sequences, which are very large and difficult to work with, and raw cooked is able to, using mathematically lossless compression, actually take those image sequences and compress them into something that more closely resembles a standard video file that you're probably familiar with, like seeing an actual video formatted as. And it generally reduces the size by about half of what the uncompressed image sequence was. But it's also, since it's mathematically lossless, we can, at a future time, reverse the mathematical algorithm that was used to compress those files and actually get a bit-for-bit representation of the original files back with no loss at the end of the process. So that saves us a significant amount of space while also preserving that uncompressed file at the end of the project. And so digital preservation is a cyclical process. It focuses on keeping multiple copies of data. So I'd mentioned that we're currently writing 2 duplicate copies of anything that we back up on tape. And then that data has to be regularly migrated and checked anytime it's moved to new storage. So kind of the way this looks is we write our data to tape, verify it, and are regularly assessing that, preparing it, and then migrating it to a new format. In the case of LTO, every few years they release a new generation. You don't necessarily, or because LTO is backwards compatible a few generations, you generally don't have to upgrade with each new generation, but every few generations of LTO tape, you eventually want to migrate to the latest version. So you do have to regularly pull all of your data from old tapes and migrate it to new tapes. And currently, FPS holds over 700 terabytes of data, and that spans both LTO7 and LTO9 tapes. A lot of that data is actually even just 2K scans. So we can expect that that amount of data is going to increase exponentially as we continually increase the standards that we're digitizing films to. And there are a few, or this is just kind of going back over some of the challenges of these workflows. So with these files, as has been mentioned before, we have numerous very large files. This is an example of the file size of a single reel that we might be dealing with. So do you remember offhand if this was a single?
Yeah, that's a 1,000
okay. So this is a 1,000 foot reel. Is it 6K, 4K?
Yes.
6K? So this is a 6K 16-bit 1,000 foot reel. It is approximately 2 terabytes, and that's only one reel of a film. So we're going to end up with one of those for every reel, and then if we're also restoring the film, we're going to end up with a duplicate copy of those, and then if we are also delivering a final version of the film, which we most likely are, we'll also have a third version of that, which will be all 3 of those reels combined. And so, yeah, as we increase the resolution and bit depths that we're capturing at, we also need more capable hardware to handle those. We're also working with a lot of non-standard materials, so these historic film processes have unknown characteristic curves. If we were working with modern film stocks, in a lot of cases, the conditions that those film stocks were manufactured under and kind of the workflows that they were built around, they were, we would actually be able to kind of characterize, say, a negative that we scan and then apply a specific lookup table to that and actually get an accurate representation of what a positive print of that would look like on a specific film stock. In the case of these historic film stocks, though, they predate a lot of that standardization, so we're kind of just going by what we have in the film itself. Again, so there are no clearly defined lookup tables or transforms, unlike modern film stock. So in a lot of cases, we're adapting modern tech and workflows to these older non-standard formats. It's also the question of, well, can we just digitize everything that has a very large data burden and cost? Scanning's also very time-consuming and involves a lot more than just throwing a reel on a scanner. And then, what is the future of film? So, at least for now, film is still the best long-term preservation format for us. Our films, or the final film output that we put in the vault, we're relatively confident will outlast, say, one of the LTO tapes, if that LTO tape is not regularly migrated. Whereas that film print, if you just put it in the vault and leave it there, there's a good chance it'll probably still be there in 100 years. And even without, say, all of the technology to project it, you'd still be able to just look at the film through some light and get a sense of what it is. And I don't know, do we all want to come up for the last slide?
Sure. For this. So, if you want to learn more, first, come to the Nitrate Picture Show. It is our annual festival of film conservation here in the Dryden Theater. This year, it's from May 30th to June 2nd. As we said earlier, we're one of only several theaters in the United States that is allowed to show this type of historic material. So it really is like going back in time and seeing a movie as if you're, in 1942 or 39. We have prints coming in from all over the world, as well as prints from our own collection. So you'll get to see a lot of really great, unique material there. There is the sort of North American Alliance of Moving Image Archives is called AMIA, the Association of Moving Image Archivists. They have a website, amianet.org. Our institution is a part of AMIA. Many archives, libraries, universities across the country are part of this. They have a lot of resources if you're interested in learning more about this type of work. There's also the international version, the International Federation of Film Archives, FIAF. The letters are switched because it's naturally in French, Fédération Internationale. They also have more resources. We are a member of FIAF here at the George Eastman Museum. There's also the Image Permanent Institute at RIT. They conduct a lot of research into film materials and their characteristics and how to keep them in the best shape for as long as possible, and the differences between different film stocks and the type of storage conditions they need. So if you have any home movies at home and you want to figure out how to best preserve them, that's a good resource to check out online. There's also filmcolors.com if you want to learn more about historical film colors, a lot of the hand-colored materials, films where the base is tinted so the entire image is one color, or stencils were applied so certain parts of the image are one dye and other parts are another dye. You can see very interesting and beautiful film and learn a lot while you're doing it at filmcolors.com. The museum has a School of Film Preservation, of which the three of us are all graduates, where you learn how every part of the archive works, not just digital preservation, and you spend the entire year working with the staff members directly, working on projects, learning more about the museum, more about how to care for motion picture film collections. It has certificate 1 year and master's 2 year programs, or you can just email us if you have any questions.
Thank you guys for that presentation. It was wonderful to see it all sort of put together in that way. And if anybody in the audience is like me, you got lost at some point in time.
Sorry about that.
No, it's wonderful. And this is why we have the opportunity to ask some questions. But as Tim is back there with a microphone, we do ask you to talk into the microphone with all of these. We're recording these, so not only is it good for the recording, but also for everyone else in the audience to hear. But I have the privilege of starting the questions to help clear my mind. Maybe we'll start at the end with the conservation, because that is one of the first things that we think about when archiving, is that conservation of the original elements as well as the preservation elements are so important. And as we are transferring these files from one medium to another, that seems to be sort of a dead end at one point. And I guess I was hoping for thoughts on the cost and as compared to film conservation, as well as the future of these sort of conservation efforts for digital.
Yeah, I would almost I would see film as more of the, not to say that film is a dead end, but when you have a print or a negative that can just stay in a static, storage conditions for 1,000 years, that's pretty advantageous. Digital is an endless road, where if you leave it on one of those tapes, eventually that tape will degrade. So you must keep up with it in perpetuity, forever and ever, if you want to maintain that data. So one thing we didn't mention was every single bit of information, every single file receives an accompanying what's called a checksum, which is an algorithm that you get a result that takes into consideration every single bit, every single piece of that data, and that's recorded in a very specific way, so that when it is transferred between these different storage media, that you can verify that it is exactly the same as it was. So for instance, if you capitalized one letter differently in the title of the file, the resulting from the formula would be something completely different. So you would know immediately if something has changed. So that's one part of this process that I don't think we touched on. But
and that recognizes any degradation within the files.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So everything, that's part of, as Josh mentioned, the verification. But that process is endless. It will, every time it moves, every time we move it between, say, a hard drive to a server, we verify that it all came and that it's all original. But yeah, so it's unfortunately, I wish it were a dead end. We have to continuously move and maintain this data. LTO may go away at some point, and we may store everything on servers forever, but they must be, there must be redundant copies, and they must be continuously checked.
And to your point about the cost, LTO has a few cost-based advantages to it when it comes to storing your digital files. The first of which is that it's the most cost-effective in terms of how many terabytes your dollar will buy you, as opposed to, say, some cloud service. And additionally, it's offline storage, so it's energy saving. Once the tape is written, you can put it in its little box and put it on the shelf and leave it there until it's time to assess and migrate again.
Which is, they say, roughly 30 years a tape is good for. We're doing it long before then.
Yeah, but I could play my beta tape 30 years ago, and I can't play it now. So it's the hardware that's part of that conservation effort as well.
Exactly right, yeah.
To come back to the fixity topic, or the checksum topic, so we generally refer to checksums as the file fixity. That's also an important topic for the file formats that we're choosing. So I had mentioned that we're using raw cooked to losslessly compress our files, and one of the actual big advantages of that is that it's putting the files from the DPX format that they start into a FFV1 MKV format And the nice thing about that format compared to DPX is that it actually internally stores checksum information for not just frames, but actually blocks of the image within the frame. So the file is kind of self-describing of its own integrity in a way. And so that's also an important factor in terms of just the continued accessibility of the digital formats that we're choosing, not just the physical medium of the digital format itself.
Yeah, and it takes, like we keep saying, thousands and thousands of files per reel and compresses them manageably into one single file, which LTO and these data storage media prefer handling files like that rather than 27,000 files.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
We were talking about the restoration, talking a little bit about restoration, and all of the, and sort of in the same area of the presentation, we're talking about the repair or the digital cleanup that you do on there. So do you do the cleanup before or after you put the pieces together? Because I'm not sure, maybe that's a question, it's project by project. As you were talking about putting these pieces together and how they don't always match, does the cleanup, the restoration interfere with that matching?
Yeah, so typically if we know we're doing a reconstruction, we'll assemble the complete timeline first and then commence restoration. That way we know exactly which frames to restore for each film, and we're not spending days restoring shots that won't make it into the final version. Ideally, that's the way it works. Sometimes we're in the middle of a project and whoop, another copy was discovered. Time to scan that, and oh, it's better than the one we've already started on. So,
which is great. I mean, if we have a higher quality copy that's longer, that's preferred. And I think in an ideal world, we would restore all elements involved, but it's extremely time-consuming work, all of these stages, but especially digital restoration.
And one thing just intrinsic to restoration that makes it especially time-consuming is that when we apply these automatic filters to pick up any dirt and dust, they're very intelligent and they're very smart, but like all of us, they're not perfect. They get things wrong all the time. And so, if Jared, someone was filming you right now and you turn your head kind of quickly, the shine on your glasses, our program might think that that's a piece of dust, and for a few frames you'll have no eyeball. And so we have to go in each shot frame by frame, and in addition to performing our manual repairs on more severe instances of damage, we have to identify repairs from the automatic filter and undo anything that's erroneous or creating what we call a digital artifact, which is something that's not original to the film. And so, yeah, it's restoration because we have to, in addition to making it look better, restore everything that the computer tries to take out of it. So.
And that leads to a question I had. So sometimes when you are using a piece of a frame to replace a piece of the frame that's missing, sometimes that piece that you're reusing to replace is not from the same element. If those frames are back to back. In
those instances, we're only restoring or interpolating from adjacent frames of the same element.
Okay.
Only after we've restored an entire element, say, and then we export, do we sort of integrate them into the, where multiple frames might be from different elements, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it does. So talking about this restoration part again, and having these tools that can automate some of this. So we are making decisions about what to change or what to restore, but we are giving it to the computer to do those automatically with a quality check, as you say, to make sure that it hasn't taken away too much. And that's sort of an automated intelligence because someone is behind those decisions. But as we get further and further into artificial intelligence, I've heard horror stories about archives using this to do ungodly things, to restorations. How do you see it fitting in with our program, and maybe generally what are the ethics of using AI for this restoration?
So the tools that we use currently have some AI features in beta testing that we'll use sometimes, and they can be really helpful. They can be very powerful as long as you know what to use them for. So if we're using the AI to remove dirt and dust and scratches, and it does a really bang-up job, then why not use it? But there are other, and that's something that ethically we don't have a problem with. There are other ethical concerns with AI. Say, if people want to, this is a dirty word, but if they want to colorize the film, that is something that's unoriginal, and that would be an application of AI that we stay away from.
Yeah, at this stage, the tools that are in the pieces of software that we use are I don't know exactly where the distinction is, but it's more like machine learning, where it's sort of training on a set of information, as opposed to trying to create something like a generative AI. We're just sort of putting it on one specific task. As Graham's saying, we're okay with it, with it sampling, a certain profile of dirt, say. But if we were getting to the point where we want to create things that aren't there, that we can't accurately say are there, there's no application for us for that technology at FPS, unfortunately.
Well, no, that's okay. That's fortunate, because I've heard of archives interpolating multiple frames within a scene that tracks movement within the frame. So they're creating these frames that don't exist based on the beginning and the end, or creating the edge of an image that was released both as silent and sound version, and the sound version the silent version no longer exists. So they interpolate the side of that frame that the soundtrack is covering. So I guess that's more what I was thinking in terms of the real ethical questions that face archivists.
Yeah, I can't see us using those tools. We just couldn't say for sure that was there. And I mean, yeah, we have so many other films that we could work on that we have sort of known data on. Yeah, I don't think we would ethically cross that bridge.
But that does bring up a question I had about priorities. So at one point in time, this was back when preservation was a little cheaper and we had fewer films, I would use the figures of 25,000 titles and an average of $40,000 per restoration. That's $1 billion just on our collection here at the museum. And we obviously don't have the money, we don't have the time for that. So how is the prioritization working within FPS, not only with the films that we've already preserved photochemically, but and also maybe films that are not candidates for photochemical preservation?
So those types of decisions, we are not the ones making those types of decisions
yet.
So our priorities, the films that we prioritize preservation for, they usually fall under one of several criteria. Things that are unique are high candidates for preservation, and unique meaning there's something about this copy of the film that distinguishes it from other copies of the film. That can mean it's the only copy left in the world. It can mean it's the only copy with this one scene left in the world. Anything that makes it unique and stand out among the crowd. Things that are decomposing quickly and are in danger of total image loss, that will become a candidate for preservation because we want to get a snapshot of that image as soon as we can. And things that have cultural or historical significance also will be higher priority than other materials. And a lot of times those three criteria on the films that we're working on will intersect. There'll be, culturally significant films that are also unique and maybe have some damage. So they'll have at least one of those three qualities if it's something that we're working on urgently.
But often we are say, you sort of alluded to practices of the past where we might have made a preservation negative of a film that has not, that does not have a digital, copy available. Occasionally, there are grants for access so that it can be seen by a wider audience. So those often come up as well.
We have kind of in recent times, I think, started digitizing more material without necessarily doing a film out at the end. So I see that as something that will probably continue to ramp up in the future.
Yeah. Additionally, films that, to come back to the Nitrate Picture Show, unique copies that will play, that will be projected. We make, the fullest preservation copy of those films that we can make before they screen. So that's an application as well.
And eating into those priorities, you touched on it a little bit, but you have taken external jobs as well, right? So you've scanned for other companies or producers, individuals. You take requests from individuals. So how does that work? And maybe if someone has something out there that they need transferred, how do they get in touch? You got the emails up there, I guess.
Yeah, the emails. The lab email is labservices@eastman.org. But yeah, the lab is very busy. We have, we have many preservation projects at any time, grant-funded projects, external client projects, student projects. So we're a small team. Luckily, the Selznick School of Film Preservation, we're working with 3 students right now who are helping us with a large reconstruction project of an early Western star, William S. Hart, where we are undergoing that process that I described of searching worldwide for the best copies, reconstructing and restoring those films. I believe we're doing 9, but it's a multi-institution, multi-year collaborative effort. So we're very fortunate to have their help. But the technology that we're using to perform all this work in the last several years has gotten so much better. Our quality has gotten so much better, and we're able to do the work so much faster. So yeah, it's a perfect time to be doing this work. labservices@eastman.org.
Great. So I want to open it up to the floor now. If you could raise your hand. We've already got several up. And Tim will be coming around to grab your question. You're next, sir.
First of all, Visual Studies Workshop also offers services of transferring materials, and maybe could be a little faster, but they don't, as far as I know, do conservation on them. I'm interested in issues of equipment conservation, because these films can't be projected unless the projectors are available. And is there any parallel effort going on to make sure that these will be able to be projected?
Yeah, I think it's a very relevant question to sort of the working equipment that we use at the lab as well. There's a lot of pieces of equipment that we're trying to preserve the original operating system and conditions under which they worked, to sort of create virtual images or virtual computers of what was originally used for a certain process. That's something we're very interested in, sort of preserving the software as well as the hardware. But to your specific question about projectors, I'm pretty sure there's an ongoing effort here to thoroughly document the individual components of, say, a projector, such as we have here at the Dryden, to make those pieces available such that they could be machined in the future to replace parts as they fail. I know that's a big interest, and our projectionist Daryl Jones, I think, is interested in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a technology department here at the Eastman Museum, and I can't speak to the details of what they do, but as long as we have them and the great staff at the Dryden here taking care of our projectors, there will be efforts to make sure that film projection doesn't fade away.
Additionally, going back to the students, they're also very keen to learn the skills of projection, which are not easy to come by these days. So at least, maintaining the enthusiasm and the knowledge around film exhibition on film is something that's very strong here. But I think it's a great question. The schematics and specifics of the machines are going to be paramount for their preservation.
There's not any centralized effort that I know of, and it's still the best way is still to have extra parts available, extra projectors that you can pull parts of so you can replace them, because machining them just is not viable right now. The 3D printing is not quite to the point where we would need it to be with that specificity, but it's difficult not only just with film projection but with digital projection as well. As those evolve and advance, we're losing some of the way that where we used to watch digital film as well. But yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's a film out just now called Film is Dead, Long Live Film, where collectors, not only of film but of technology, are shown in these vast fields of technology that just sort of exist and are rotting. So we need space to get those pieces into safe areas for archives to access, but collectors are a notoriously interesting group of people. But yeah, it's definitely a problem we need to look at going forward. Somebody's there, yeah.
I commend you on the clarity of your presentation. It already answered several questions that I had. I'd like to delve further on these two smaller points. Chris, I believe it was you who mentioned DPX format, which I understood was saving a single file from the scanning. How does that compare and contrast with TIFF, which is, from my amateur point of view, is the standard non-destructive format? And the second question is, are these processes what I think of as a non-linear editor, which to me means it doesn't touch the original, it just saves the steps, and the rendering reapplies those steps if you want to make a change? Yes.
I'll answer your second question first. Yes, it's a nonlinear, non-destructive form of editing. So any renditions that we make, any changes that we make, will not affect the original file, and we always preserve those as original, untouched. Again, if archivists want to do this work again in the future, they have a clean slate to start from. And DPXs and TIFFs are quite similar. It's basically the same function, different features. We were just talking about this the other day, sort of the metadata surrounding TIFFs and DPXs leverage different things that are slightly more applicable and slightly more useful for film scanning. So there are transfer characteristics, the machine that it was made on, et cetera, within DPX files.
And our scanner can actually capture TIFFs as well. I believe it can't capture 10-bit TIFFs, which is a common format that we scan to DPX.
Mm-hmm. So part of the lineage as digital film scanning was the origins started with a thing called the Cineon file, which morphed into a DPX, and that in those days was primarily around scanning of negatives. So I believe that's the genealogy sort of went that direction. But TIFFs were still used for higher bit depth applications. So 16-bit. We could use TIFF. I think just for cross compatibility in the nonlinear editing softwares, we prefer DPXs.
Yeah, but essentially they are both still uncompressed image file formats for each frame, and 10-bit DPX was a standard for a long time in motion picture preservation, so that was more widely adopted amongst institutions for these types of materials.
Yes, sir.
Hi.
Hey.
Thanks for the presentation. By watching you guys do this, you're obviously into this. I mean, you have a real passion for your work. And this is kind of a specialized field. When we all grew up, if you ask what you wanted to be when you grew up, you were never going to say, film preservationist. I mean, how did you develop your passion? Are you part computer guys? Are you artists? Or how does this all work? Because some of what you do is technical and some of what you do is creative.
Yeah, I have an easy answer to that. I was always seeking the intersection between art and technology, and I happened to grow up in Rochester and found that film was a great passion of many people here, but specifically I was quite interested in analog film projection, and it was still happening in Rochester, so I was able to get into the projection booth and I started learning it, not thinking I would ever use it again, that it would go away in a year because the theater was going to transition to digital. But I stayed on, and I was able to see both film and digital in equal measure. And so I just started, seeing more digital restorations hitting the screen. And so I started to ask the questions, what makes one better than the other? How do you actually translate a physical chemical dyes into a digital space? And luckily there are a lot of people in this area that had devised the technologies to do that. So I don't know. I do like the artistic side of it as well. We get to play with color most days. A lot of people think of older film as being purely black and white, but they were usually elaborately colored. So again, trying to solve the unique problem of translating these historical film colors using modern technologies that weren't devised for them is a very fun thing to do. It's a great place to work as well.
For me, I was in college thinking I was going to be a film director, and I took a class called History of World Cinema, which is a class that is only possible because of film preservation. And all these movies, they were gorgeous, they were beautiful, they were moving. I would walk out of class and I would think, oh my God, that was the coolest the coolest thing I had ever seen. And up until a few years ago, if you wanted to watch it, you were just out of luck. There was nowhere to see it. It was lost. And so before each of the films, they had, the title card giving information about this film was restored here from this negative. And I thought, oh my God, that's amazing. People actually just get to do this, and that's their job. So I talked to my professor saying, how do I be a part of a team like this? And my professor was from Rochester, and he was like, go to the George Eastman Museum.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm definitely a bit of a computer nerd, but I think I actually did kind of get started more from the artistic side. I did photography a lot, kind of like in high school and college, and initially thought I was going to be a cinematographer.
Same. Probably same, yeah.
But doing that, I encountered I did a lot of photochemical, like film developing, and that was kind of around the time where the digital transition was happening. So there was a lot of question about, like, are these newfangled digital cameras good? Are they a better replacement than film? Kind of like, what's the difference between one technology versus another? And also the question of, like, scanning negatives for photography, like, was a very relevant topic that I was looking into at that time.
Thank you.
Any other questions out in the audience? Is right in the center here, Tim, and then a couple over there. Yeah, these all help us clarify things and how to communicate this. So this is all wonderful. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. It's been wonderful. I know I just came because my son is interested in this, but I found it fascinating.
Thank you.
Do you have to have a college degree?
Well, I do not. I might be a minority amongst the people in this institution and generally in this field. I have a practical background, a more practical background. I mean, the access to projecting film is, as I mentioned, a rare skill these days, and it even was 10 years ago. So to be a young person with this interest and some technical inclination was able to take me quite a long way. I went down to New York City for a while, and through projecting in a number of archives and institutions there, I got the chance to help build a cinema, which is now in its 6th year. But no, I went to college for a little while, but I was much more interested in the vocation, I think. So I would say others would have a different answer, and it definitely depends on specifically where you are. But I think there are points of entry for everyone.
Yeah, and additionally, this may be shocking, but most colleges don't have a major in film preservation. Right. So a passion, a desire to learn new things and to get your hands dirty and, you know, get that vocational experience goes a long way in this field.
Yeah, I would actually say a lot of the most applicable skills that I have are skills that I did not learn in school.
Apart from the L. Jeffrey Selznick School of Film Preservation. That teaches you everything you need to know, at least as it relates to this very niche field.
And that's not a college.
And I got the certificate degree, so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it is, they do often look, they call it a postgraduate certificate program.
Yeah.
So they're generally looking for people who have a bachelor's degree, but people have gotten in, multiple people, without that 4-year degree. So it's about getting started somewhere, doing something, and showing that passion. I think that really helps with the application process as well. Thank you.
Yeah, so I was wondering about sound design, and if you guys ever actually focus on the sound portion of it, or if you just mostly focus on the images, or does that come into play? Because obviously that's a big part of film preservation as well.
Yeah, the majority of the projects that come to us are in the public domain, and that advances 1 year at a time. And right now we're in the late 20s, and that's right when sound starts to enter the field, right, of filmmaking. So it is something that we use plenty, but it's historically not been the focus of the lab. It's going to become more of a focus in the next few years as those films start to enter the public domain and can be, we can apply for grants. But there are plenty of people in the field that do work specifically around sound design. Yeah, it's a very interesting question to us. What frequency responses, we're able to be recorded, be able to be produced in the cinema. What was the experience like? So that's something we're going to have to devote a lot of research to and talk to our colleagues to again create an authentic digital representation of the sound.
Right now, if you're interested, there's a lot of really fascinating technology with regards to sound restoration, because the soundtrack on a strip of film, the optical soundtrack is a waveform or a barcode for most film prints. And so labs will take images of the soundtrack, so it won't be sort of run continuously or recorded continuously like a typical audio reader, and then they apply these image restoration techniques to the image of the soundtrack, and that way any dirt or dust or scratches that are on the physical waveform printed onto the film are removed, and the program can isolate the contour of that waveform and create a very pure representation of what that sound is.
And decode the sound through the image of the soundtrack.
Yeah, it's super cool. Is that new software as well as new hardware to do that as we come upon it?
There is an open source version of that application called AEO Lite that was developed Southern Methodist University?
University of Southern
Yeah,
not
somewhere.
California.
Carolina? I think.
Carolina.
Somewhere south.
Somewhere in the south.
Carolina.
And then there are proprietary versions as well that are built into sound capture sort of units. Others are trying to implement the AEO Lite into, in a more open source way with more open source technology. But those are the two options we're aware of.
Presumably, we could use the equipment that we have on a soundtrack negative to scan that and then apply the software.
Yes. Yep.
Yes, sir.
What happens if a sizable portion can't be brought back to life? What do you do with it?
We shed a tear.
What's that?
We shed a tear when that happens, because with instances of, say, just that video we showed early in the presentation where the image decomposition is more or less total, there's no reference for our software to look at, and we ethically can't generate what we think it may have looked like. So when that happens, we send out the sort of bat signal of, does any archive have a copy of this film? Please check. And if there are no copies and there's no part of it, then what we'll do in the final version, if it's not too distracting, we will leave the decomposed image. If there's still something to look at, we'll leave it. If it's just a blank white screen, we might get rid of it. But
thank you.
Any other questions? We are right around 3:30, which is an hour and a half. It's a good amount of time. Guys, is there anything that you would like to add, sort of round it out with, other than coming to the Nitrate Picture Show and seeing this again?
these were all very great questions. Thank you all.
All right. Well, Graham, Chris, Josh, thank you so much for being here and telling us all about film preservation. Don't forget to come next month, guys. Thank you so much.